Welcome, everybody. You're back on another episode of the Decentralized Tech Livestream. Today, we're going to be talking about decentralized physical infrastructure networks. It's what I'm building at Beamable. We're infrastructure for game servers and game tech, all the stuff you need to scale up and power games. And I brought into the conversation Evgeny from Fluence, which is building a compute network in DeepIn as well. So we're going to have a lot of common ground to talk about today. We're going to be able to talk about the economics of this, why it's different than other like cloud providers in the past. So if you've been scratching your head wondering like what is all this DeepIn stuff about, or you're just curious what Beamable is doing or what the future of really figuring out how to scale up a new kind of network that's community owned instead of just owned by these big siloed companies like Amazon, that's exactly the conversation today. So I think you're going to learn a lot about the future as well as the present. Let's start with Evgeny and just his background. Like, thanks for joining the program, by the way. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience just in what you've done, and then we'll dive into Fluence, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Excited to be here. And hello, everyone. I'm Evgeny, co-founder of Fluence. And we're building a decentralized computing platform, which is, as John said, a DeepIn network. I'm coming from, I basically computer science background. I, graduated from university in Russia. I learned math and was born in academic center of Russia and have a lot of friends doing science and physics and math. And chemistry. I've been doing software engineering beginning of my career, then switched to more like a product management, launching project like IT companies, like a small IT companies, IT projects there and there. Did quite a lot of internet marketing and got quite early in crypto. So I first time heard about Bitcoin in 2011, was playing with mining. There was GPU mining at the moment, mining pools, all kind of interesting things, and been following this space. But actually started doing something full time in around crypto and blockchains around 2017, and that was actually the time when we launched Fluence, and we launched it, with sort of the idea, the vision, but then we actually had to pivot a few times to figure out what would work. And but the story was that we've been looking at blockchain space and we're excited about how it can change the finance world and how it can change the internet infrastructure world. And having this IT background, I was like, okay, maybe we can have a new internet infra, maybe we can have new clouds like decentralized cloud computing, decentralized cloud storage, DNS, like a lot of actually aspects. There was potential to be decentralized, and we got some progress with many of these aspects, but not everything was actually decentralized after all these years. But we can talk about it. Yeah. So essentially, I was working on these decentralized compute solutions, or like ways to implement this, to solve this problem for quite a long time with Fluence. So yeah, I don't even remember much about my past before joining Web3.
We actually got involved in Bitcoin at about the same time. So in 2011, I mined Bitcoin, but I did it on actually, strangely enough, for this conversation, a massively decentralized basis, because I had thousands of visitors to my blog, and you could write at the time, this would no longer work, by the way, but at the time you could use a little JavaScript program, which if you aggregated it across thousands and thousands of blog viewers, you could actually mine a little bit of Bitcoin at the time.
Yeah, I remember that. Actually, I experimented with it a little bit, but it wasn't very productive.
Yeah, well, if you had a lot of visitors, you could do it. You could get enough. I mean, it was definitely good economics. If I think back to, I probably could mine a Bitcoin after several months doing that, and that's worth a decent amount today. So I can't say it was a terrible idea. So Let's start with the high level. So we have a lot of people that come to these streams who are game developers, because that's my own following. A lot of people in different dimensions of Web3, but it keeps feeling like decentralized physical infrastructure networks, DePIN, it's emerging as this hot category, but it's still very new to people, and I think people are trying to figure it out. So I have my own thoughts on this, but since this is what you've been doing for years, why don't you start by explaining what is a DPIN? Why is this revolutionary relative to the ways you could have accessed compute in the past? And then we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I usually say that DePIN overall is the new generation of sharing economy projects, or like a crowdsourcing resources. And we had this big wave of, it was more than 10 years ago, right? When Uber and Airbnb were created, and sort of people started discovering, oh, okay, like we can, get people having some resource to the marketplace and aggregate this, like resource or services provided by individuals into some platform where other people would rent from them and get the product from them. But this was like a Web2 centralized marketplaces, fully controlled by a company, and so on and so forth. But then in parallel, we saw how blockchains enable these kind of models, but without intermediaries. You have this neutral database in the middle of participants of certain service, and you can distribute payments easily, without any fees or fiat on ramps, off ramps, and stuff. And then you also have better sort of democratized management of the system, because it's blockchain, it's proof of work or proof of stake, so it's kind of like can be managed by community. So in this sense, like what DePIN is now is mostly infrastructure networks that are powered by blockchain to distribute payments, rewards, and connect participants. And they are usually not centralized in terms of governance and authority and control, or like a more democratized and centralized company. But they overall enable individuals and small companies to enter new markets and enter new sort of revenue streams that were not possible for them before, by providing some resource to this platform, to these DePIN platforms. You muted, John.
So we owe a little bit of a debt to the past of pre-blockchain ways that this could be done. So we should maybe acknowledge some of these things just to give people a sense of how they might be structured. But so I ran SETI at home, for example, for years.
Oh, yeah, sure.
An example of like there's just a lot of data mining that you effectively have to do across a very large data set. So a way to do that is to parcel it out a little bit at a time and let lots of individual computers do it. So if anybody has run SETI at home, you have done kind of, not exactly, because there's this centralized component to administer SETI at home, and we can talk in a little bit about the distinction there. But if you've ever used SETI at home, you've kind of interacted with a version of a decentralized compute network, even though there's nothing to do with blockchain there. Another example would be like folding at home, right? So folding at home is an example, and anyone can go sign up for this. It's another one you can try, where there's all these important like protein folding experiments underway, where you can offer your computer's capacity to be able to help solve these problems, and the applications there in drug discovery and biology and things like that. And a famous example of it was early in the COVID pandemic. There was actually a need to kind of really quickly get to a simulation of what was happening with the virus and do it down to a protein modeling level. So they actually got to the point where they could model a little bit of a time slice of the way the proteins associated with the COVID virus was working. And from that simulation, they were able to do a lot of really interesting vaccine work and drug discovery work related to that. So that's another example. In fact, I think up to that point in time, the virtual computer that was running the COVID simulations was like one of the biggest supercomputers at that time. So those are a couple of cases. There have been other cases like where there's decentralized networks of various kinds, like Tor, for example, is kind of a decentralized network for privacy.
Just even BitTorrent, right? Even BitTorrent was early example that everyone knew, which was kind of delivering you ability to access to a lot of files and music and videos, which mostly was not sort of legal to consume, but the technology itself is like peer-to-peer networks are very similar to what DeepIn is now. It was just no incentive, no like a monetary incentive, I would say, not direct incentive that you could get from a network by participating, but the narrative and overall it's a very similar thing.
Yeah. And Oscar, you're getting a call out from the community you probably already saw. They want you to talk more. Oscar's our producer. He keeps things on track. He keeps the camera moving. He brings in other content. And from my personal experience, it's like virtually impossible to do both of those jobs and be a great conversationalist. But of course, Oscar, we love it anytime you jump into the conversation and say something. So thanks.
I'm juggling 30 plates, but I'm more than happy to interject when it's needed.
And but that's a good cue for me to mention something at this point in time, which is we also depend a lot on you, the community, asking your questions. So this will be a conversation between me and Evgeny, but we love it when you ask your questions and want to like weigh in with a comment or have a question for me or Evgeny. So you've got someone here who's been working on decentralized compute tech for a long time. And if you're interested in that or the blockchain intersection or DeepIn, like this is a great time to ask your questions about all of the above. And I see we've already got 250 or so people in the live audience. So there's plenty of people here. This is probably bigger than most of the talks that you could attend at like one of these big blockchain conferences. Like you could go to DeepIn Day or Token 2049 or Consensus and have a DeepIn talk. For the most part, you're not going to get an audience of even a couple hundred people. So here you are, you could have direct access. So please ask your questions. And if you're watching this in replay, by the way, like, hey, think about coming to one of these live and participating in the conversation. We could even put you on camera, by the way. We're kind of crazy on this live stream. So if you want to talk to us and jump on the stage, Oscar will send you a link to StreamYard and we'll get you in. So please do ask those questions. So here's probably the big question. This is one of the questions I get asked probably more than almost any question, including from blockchain investors, Evgeny. So I'm curious how you answer it, because you probably get the same question too, which is, okay, well, we had it in the past. We had SETI at home. I get it. Like there's a distinction between a total centralized controller versus truly decentralizing it. But why do we need that? Why do you need a token? Like why is tokenizing this economy matter ultimately? What are your thoughts on that? Why does DeepIn need a token at all?
Yeah, so like I think there's two different questions, like why you need blockchain overall, right? And then why you need token. Like with blockchain, essentially, as we said before, if we have huge amount of participants globally on the network that earn some money and want to transact through like by providing services to each other or to one single big aggregation, you want easy transactions to happen, to send like small pieces of revenue to like any person in the world, and blockchain just does it really well. And then like democratization of overall governance also solved well. Then the second thing is like, why do you need token, right? And different networks answer it differently. Overall, token is something that allow like in the way I look at it, at least, is something that allows you to scale faster. It's essentially a tool. Your network can theoretically exist without token, because this service is not a token. The service is video server or like anything, right? It's a software product, but the token allows to create additional incentives for both supply and demand sides, and essentially accelerate. Like if we consider DePIN as a two-side marketplace, then we can accelerate the growth, or like the flywheel, by rewarding supply side and attracting more supply side, then rewarding demand side and attracting more demand side. So, and that's essentially what all these early sharing economy projects like Uber did. They subsidized riders and they subsidized drivers, but they did it by using essentially their venture funds money, capital that they raised, and they just essentially paid cash to audience to bootstrap in new cities. And then they started reducing this subsidy. With tokens, we can do similar things. So if we need to bootstrap certain sub-market or like bootstrap the whole market overall, we can start from subsidies, but then we need to reduce them over time. But at the same time, because token is really like connected to value overall created by the protocol, the network, what you get is that early participants who contribute early, who join early, and being subsidized with those tokens, they actually benefit from the project growth, because the token usually it's usually correlated. When your project is more successful, token is growing right in price. So essentially, if you contribute early, you get some tokens, you get benefits later when we have like a more growth and overall project growth. So this is one important aspect of having a token. The second aspect is governance, essentially, right? Okay, we want this network to be neutral, to be infrastructure, to be not controlled by a single entity. How do we do it? It's not really possible in Web2 world, in non-blockchain world. That's why essentially we need some tool to represent voting power. And we need to grant this voting power to people. And then, in crypto, there's been a lot of experimentation with DAOs, with different voting schemes. But overall, on average, voting power usually represented by amount of tokens either held by person or being delegated to this person, right? So as a trust. So essentially, token governance component is very important part for token existence. So I think sort of these two aspects really make the DePIN network bootstrapping and growth and management much more powerful with token.
So I agree with everything you just said about the ability to essentially the first part. What you were saying is the token is a more capital efficient way to bootstrap and then scale out a network due to that flywheel effect. If you can incentivize supply and demand, and kind of as this network scales, everybody's happy with the incentive mechanism, which you can decrease incentives over time as the network grows and it becomes more potent economically. The second part was about governance. To me, there's another thing that goes kind of hand in hand with the governance piece, which is just this idea of using the token to align the incentives of all of the network's participants. So in a traditional business model, and I'm curious what you think of this as well. Traditional business model is you have a corporation which generates profit for its shareholders, and then they create products, and then those products have to be increasingly profitable over time, either through growth and or better value extraction over time. And the customer kind of votes with their wallet every time they keep buying the product. The problem with it is there are multiple layers of disconnect between the customer and what they really want and the profit generating entity, and then all those layers of management which sit in between, which kind of have the principal agent problem. With a token, you have network suppliers, you have the demand side, you have anyone who's interested in the future roadmap of it, voting and governance, which was your example, to me, that's actually in principle a financial model that gets everybody working together a lot more effectively, because the demand side can't call all the shots or the suppliers go away, right? And vice versa, the suppliers don't get to just dictate everything that happens. They have to be part of a cohesive roadmap. They have to be able to offer their equipment or hardware, in the case of a decentralized physical infrastructure network, in a way that's economically viable, hopefully through even some competition mechanisms around pricing. So it's that alignment of interests that I actually think is really interesting about a tokenized economy. What are your thoughts there? Anything to add or subtract from that?
I think that's the right way to look at it. And you could argue that, okay, like, people also can buy Apple stock when they as they buy iPhones, right? But in crypto, what's cool is like this nature of sort of ability to get those tokens for contribution, or just get them easily on the market, any fraction of the token, like for $1, for like 10 cents, for anything, right? It essentially means if you have a big project with millions of users, it's much more probable that this, like a higher percentage of these users would own some part of some of tokens, versus these users would own your stock if you had stock instead of token. So the point is that you have the whole ecosystem. You have users, providers, some core team members, investors. And if you have a token versus stock versus like shares, the higher percentage of this ecosystem would have token versus having stock, just because it's much easier to get token. And because you can get token by contributing. It could be like token cashbacks, could be like a lot of mechanics. Even if you're just a customer, you just pay money, you still, most probably when you interact with crypto project, you still most probably would get involved in owning the token, which makes you much more aligned with the whole kind of direction of the project, versus when you're just a customer of some Web2 company.
So what's been the hardest part, if we kind of bring it back to Fluence and what you're building? Maybe let's introduce to the audience here specifically Fluence, like what's the problem you're solving, and what's been challenging about building the network that you're building?
Yeah. So what we do is a decentralized computing platform. Essentially, we are aggregating computing resources globally and packaging them into the cloud services, which we offer to mainly B2B customers, similarly to big clouds like Amazon AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure. I guess in the specifics of this product is that, like, we want to really build the alternative infrastructure to big cloud platforms, big cloud companies. And we understand that actually, huge part of the internet of all digital services we use every day relies on these big platforms and corporations. And if we really want to build alternative, this alternative has to be very, very reliable. We have to feed, SLA, service level agreements, like uptime and so on and so forth. So this actually creates quite a lot of challenges in terms of how we technically provide services and how we approach the supply side, like the compute providers on our network. And for example, that's why at the current stage of the network, we only allow professional providers who own enterprise-grade servers in a top-tier facilities, like in data centers, like tier 4 data centers, because we haven't found the way. Like we would love to involve more people to be providers, to contribute their compute capacity in whatever form they have to a network. But the problem is uptime and latency, right? If we have this capacity and we bring it to customer, and customer loses access, then how do we solve it? And then it's actually not trivial thing, because every customer needs very different services and tolerable to very different downtime types. But overall, like, in cloud world, people invented sort of reliable, on-demand, and reserved compute, and then they invented spot instances, which people understand that it's something available to you temporarily, which may go down, or like maybe just resold to another customer at any moment of time. So there are certain types of workloads that you would run on it, but you know that this is not very reliable in terms of uptime. So right now we focus only on demand and reserved instances, but then also we will bring Spot, and Spot, when building Spot, we will have much more ability to bring compute not only from top-tier facilities. Essentially, we would tolerate downtimes because customer would be ready for it, and we would have more ability to migrate workloads quickly to other instances.
So there's a question from the audience here, which is basically nobody really knows about DPIN yet, which, by the way, that's probably not a bad thing for those of you who are watching today. Like, you're the ones who are picking up all the alpha here on a market, which is today still quite small, really, and the revenue generated by DPIN projects mostly is still quite small compared to like big commercial enterprises. The question really, though, is why don't people know about it yet? I'll give one answer, and would love to hear your own view, Evgeny. I mean, one thought is, although the term is new, some aspects of this have always been present in blockchain. So if we look at Bitcoin, for example, I actually had someone say at a conference to me something interesting, like Bitcoin was actually the original DPIN project, because what it is it's a bunch of servers who mine out Bitcoins. And of course, today, Bitcoin is tremendously valuable as an asset and even a medium of exchange sometimes. So Bitcoin had computers that were decentralized, that joined the network, adhered to the protocol, mined out the Bitcoins by doing cryptographic algorithms, basically. Now, what DPIN is really about is, again, having hardware on the network that does something, but the something now is something that other customers need, not just the ability to generate a token. The token is the reward, but it's not the work being done by the nodes. It's not like you have to do a bunch of crypto algorithms on the node. You're doing, for example, compute, or running a game server like we do, or Helium, which is Wi-Fi, or geo mapping, or all these weather, like all these really interesting applications where there's some hardware device that joins the network, does work, where the payoff is no longer cryptographic inherently in nature, but it is doing work that pays a token. So you're essentially mining with DPIN nodes, is another way to think of it. How do you explain this, and like why? Like, I think that people who go to big conferences like Consensus and stuff have seen DPIN, but the broader blockchain community, like I noticed when talking to people from Web3 gaming, for example, like they're very unfamiliar with it. And if I mention the idea of nodes, they're used to these nodes that were sold by various game projects, where they're not really nodes in the way you and I probably think of it. Like, we think of nodes as a hard piece of equipment doing work, but these other nodes were really just mostly just NFTs that unlocked a currency drip for these death spiral economies for the most part. And that's not what we're talking about when we do nodes in DPIN. Like, DPIN nodes actually do work, serving something that a customer needs done, like a game server, for example. How can we bring awareness to that?
I think this node sales a little bit created this a little bit of chaos in people's minds, because projects be selling these NFTs as a license to run a node, and then people think that they buy a node. They actually buy a license to run a node and then to participate in the network. But I actually agree that blockchains being probably first DPIN proper DPIN projects, because you run a node, you earn some crypto, you provide value to a network, and you earn some crypto. And it both the case for proof of work and proof of stake. And actually, today, I think people run hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of nodes for blockchains. And that's how you can count it as DPIN. But then if you don't count just blockchains as DPIN, then I would say that DPIN is still quite small. We definitely see the progress. It's also about us collectively pushing the narrative a little bit and explaining people what it is. It kind of helps. We see it's growing, and we're doing all these conferences and podcasts around DPIN. But I think it's just it was required some level of maturity from blockchain world to enable networks like we are building. Because we actually rely much on what blockchain technologies was created, like rollups, for example.
Yes.
Right now, like Fluence runs on a rollup, which is layer 2 to Ethereum, which is the rollup, like this, which is the blockchain, separate blockchain network that allows very, very cheap transactions and secured by Ethereum, by parent chain. And we use a bunch of like a standard things that been invented in a crypto world, like a bridges, from parent chain to our chain and back, certain standard smart contracts like multi-sigs and so on and so forth. And it just took some years to have it built, so we can just go and use it and build our network using all these tools. And we needed it because we are not DeFi applications. So like our transactions are very, very small and fractional. Like we want people to really be able to pay like just a couple of dollars and get compute. And then we also want provider to consistently earning revenue by small transactions from people. And when you sit on a public chain, you compete for the block space with other projects that sit on there. And then it's typical kind of crypto thing. Whenever like any hype project appears, like NFT drops or like meme coins, anything like this, blocks used to get full with transactions. Transaction fees increase. Now, if you're just using some service and want to send $5 around, now your transaction fee can be super high, and you're not happy as a customer. So we wanted to avoid it completely. That's why we went to rollup. And rollup is basically the chain that only us, Fluence, sit on this chain, no one else there. And but in order to have it, to use it reliably, we had to wait a little bit until these technologies would mature.
Yeah. You're really pointing to it's really only been the last 2 to 3 years really that any blockchain has existed at scale that can do high throughput, fast finality coupled with low gas fees, right? So layer 2s, is one approach to that, as well as these other newer chains that kind of have it built in. But up until then, like if it was built on Ethereum, and you really need a smart contract type chain to build these kind of technologies. Like if you built a DPIN on Ethereum 3 or 4 years ago, you'd have to pay like, I don't know, a $50 gas fee every time you got a little bit of credit for offering your computer. So it wasn't really feasible at that time. So that, it explains a lot about the explosion of DPIN over the last few years. And then companies like Helium, for example, or there's several actually that have started to move to Solana, which has some of those properties built in. Like Beamable is shipping our DPIN on Solana for similar reasons as you're using a roll-up layer 2 on Ethereum. Relatively low cost for becoming part of any transaction on the network that gets you there.
Yeah, actually, the funny thing that the DPIN ideas overall are not new, right? They've been here for many years, and people really tried to build stuff, and they failed. And they failed mainly, like you basically earlier you had the choice, either you go to some of the existing chains like Ethereum, and then your users pay, many dollars transaction fees, and then obviously you cannot really enable a lot of use cases with it. Or you build your own blockchain, which is very, very hard. Like, you have to maintain the network of validators. You have to make sure there's no attacks on your consensus layer. So you start, and then you need to onboard users to your chain, which would be separated and isolated from other chains. So it was really, really challenging. And you ended up sort of working on the blockchain part of your product instead of working on your core product. And that's why we saw a lot of projects failed earlier. Yeah, but also like now you have this scalable chains like Solana. You have multiple layers of rollups for Ethereum. So now it's actually much easier. And there is also like a bunch of abstractions built in UX. You can just, as a developer, you just can go to this rollup as a service and spin on the new rollup in a few minutes. So that's actually really great progress with developer tooling of blockchains enabled it as well.
Crypto from X is chiming in. Why not Base? Well, Base is perfectly viable too. Like, Base is very low transaction costs, gas fees for the most part. I mean, they're not a layer 2 per se. They're an EVM built on basically a clone of Ethereum, other than a few changes that they made. But like, it's similar in the sense that you have these EVMs that are designed from the ground up for lower gas fees and faster finality, and they all ultimately sort of interconnect back to Ethereum at the end of some long sequence of processes. Like, Ethereum kind of becomes the ultimate settlement layer, clearinghouse for where a lot of these financial networks end up getting connected in. But yeah, I think Base is another great example. We know the Base team and have talked to them a lot about it. We have games being built on Base, so they're great. And you could point to a long list of them. Arbitrum is, that is another example where a bunch of DePIN projects are rolling out. What do you see, Evgeny, as some of the blockchains where most DePIN activity is happening?
I think mainly what I saw was Solana, Arbitrum, and Ethereum, essentially. Somehow a bunch of projects appeared on Arbitrum or used Arbitrum technology to build their own rollups. And then other group of projects just appeared on Solana. And these are two big groups I'm observing. I don't know why. Like, I think mainly, like, I don't know why Arbitrum, like not Optimism, for example. It's very hard to answer. It just happened somehow. And on Solana, I guess it's same reason. People was just looking for the chain with cheap fees, transaction fees, without the need of operating your own nodes of the chain or something like this.
I also want to give a preview for a little bit later in the program, about 10 or 15 minutes from now. I know some of you are waiting for the secret word we're giving out, because we're doing our own gamification over at Beamable, where you can earn a point reward towards the airdrop we're going to do post TGE. And if you listen closely, you're going to hear that secret word. What I'd love to see from everybody is mention some questions here in the chat, or put some comments in, ask some questions, I should say. So we love the engagement. We get crypto. You've got a good name, because obviously you're crypto native. You're polling us on every chain. Sui is another good one. I think that and I love Sui. I think they are really committed to gaming as an application class, because we talked to a lot of really great game developers who are going to Sui. They kind of are going to Sui for a similar reason, which is Sui kind of has this hyper performance, fast finality, low cost, very high throughput, which is very good for the kind of microtransactions that games need. But you are making a good observation, which is for a lot of DePIN projects, the same thing that would make a blockchain performant for microtransactions in a game, a lot of things that happen in a DePIN network are also essentially microtransactions. So SWE, I think in theory has the performance for it. I think what it doesn't have currently that you see in things like Solana or sort of the EVM ecosystem generally is not a lot of traction around other projects that have solved problems and that you can sort of riff off of, because I think ecosystem and code ends up being an important reason in this particular space. So there's just more to leverage into your project if you go off some of those existing ones. But in principle, SWE could do it quite well, I think, on purely a performance basis. I don't know that it's necessarily one of the target markets that they're particularly focused on at the moment. I don't know if you have any thoughts to add on SWE in particular, Evgeny.
Yeah, I don't. I guess from our perspective, we look at blockchains from different perspective, right? Actually, I would show Fluence for a minute. So essentially, yeah, I said we built a decentralized cloud, but I didn't kind of explain what it is and how is it kind of plays role in the Web3 ecosystem overall. Because one of the main use cases is running blockchain nodes. Like we essentially provide infra servers, like physical servers and virtualized servers, where people can deploy any workloads, anything that they run in Web2 Cloud, like databases, backends, game servers, like anything, right? But in Web3, main use case, computational use cases. People running nodes, people running Ethereum nodes, Sui nodes, Arbitrum, Solana, anything. And we provide this infra globally, and because right now it's kind of a little bit silly. We all building this Web3. It's all decentralized. It's all great and alternative financial system, but it heavily relies on centralized cloud. So when Amazon wants to turn off half of blockchain, they can do it like in a minute. So that's why having this infra, low-level infra, very important. And so that's why, for us, all the chains is great. We're happy to support them. Like we can run any blockchain nodes to secure any blockchains, like for the customers who need these nodes. Yeah, we also have this AI use case, which is coming. So currently we only focus on just CPU servers, but GPUs are coming because it's actually, there's a lot of quite growing intersection between Web3 and AI, and a lot of Web3 projects demand GPUs because their nodes also require GPU access. And we're also bringing it to people. But overall, the point I'm trying to make is that the chain there are certain features of different chains where you can build this or that type of services easier or harder. But there is also there's also node management part of any chain. Like if you need to run a node for a certain chain, you need a compute infrastructure, which we are happy to provide to the whole ecosystem.
You're kind of connecting into an adjacent topic, which is just the composability of Web3. So by composability, meaning a lot of these protocols can interact with each other and work together in the same way other protocols do. Like you were just mentioning how Amazon could shut things down. Well, we can drop to lower level protocol levels. Like there's no CEO of TCP/IP, for example. Like no one can shut down TCP/IP. But that's how almost all computers on the internet interact today. There's not really any CEO of domain name services, right? Like that's actually a relatively decentralized, or a CEO of email, right? So these are examples where computers on a peer-to-peer basis can connect with each other or form networks that allow certain services to be delivered. And that's kind of inherent in the idea of decentralization. Now, when it comes to computer provisioning, it has this new problem in it, which is not many, outside of use cases like a SETI at home or a folding at home, not many people are willing to just donate computers, especially computers that just end up being used for commercial profit-generating applications like a game or operating blockchains or operating any number of commercial applications, right? So what you have to do there, unless you're going to build huge financial infrastructure in a centralized way, which would be the alternative solution, but if you want to do it like TCP/IP or email or domain name services, then you have to build in the value exchange into the protocol itself. And that's really what blockchain does. It allows you to, with smart contracts, it allows you to facilitate value exchange. So in the protocol level, you can actually get paid in a token, or I mean, some DePIN also do stable coin pricing. We're going to offer stable coin options as well on our network for people that just want sort of less volatility around token when they provision services. The blockchain lets you do that. It lets you bake into the protocol a financial exchange when that needs to happen, which certainly for access to capital equipment to run your software, you really, really need that. So that leads, though, to the second piece, which is now that you've got things that can do the value exchange and do things like computer provisioning, it opens up this whole universe of now you can start writing software that does something like provisions a computer to help backstop whatever's needed. So instead of having to go to a SaaS company for a service that's more canned, or go to Amazon and just like order your own servers and like write all the middleware and connect it all together. Well, now you can start writing software that provisions computers on demand and brings them into your use case. And the composability of Web3 is what lets you do that, because we're dealing with the protocol level. So an example of that, for example, is at Beamable, as we're building our DePIN, we're actually going to other compute networks that have access to good data center level compute that is appropriate for running AAA games. And we don't have to just rely only on sort of the nodes that have directly accessed Beamable. We're happy to source computer capacity off of anywhere, including other DePIN projects that have access to compute capacity. And you can only do that when you have the ability to easily compose all these other networks in. And when you can do it with smart contracts, it makes it much easier to facilitate the value exchange up and down that value chain effectively. Thoughts on composability or anything I was just saying, Evgeny?
Yeah, I think I like this, how we move towards the world where I actually can permissionlessly, on demand, in the moment, rent huge amount of computers like in a seconds from all of this DePIN infrastructure, right? If I need this, like if I have this spike in usage, if I have like millions of users coming to me and I need to serve them, I can like quickly rent it from DePIN network, from us as well, right? But there's a bunch of DePIN networks like what we do. And it's because it's all implemented through smart contracts, it's totally doable. I guess the only current challenge is that where we need to move forward a little bit is that essentially like everyone is building on either different rollup or different chain. And okay, like if you want to at the same time rent from Fluence and another infrastructure project, you would need to interact with two different chains, which maybe, in terms of implementation of it first time, slightly challenging, but good
use case for all these multi-chain projects that are coming along now to kind of simplify integration between chains.
Yeah. So I hope that we will see more and more sort of universal abstractions on top of different networks and different networks within the single category, like networks that provide the same or similar products. When you have like an abstraction over it, which is also permissionless, now if I have a demand for compute, I just go to the abstraction and then it's been rented from multiple networks. So it's actually, if you compare it to how I do it today, it's very different experience, because today I have to pre-set up account in big cloud platforms, and I need to make sure my quotas are there. So, and they usually don't give me good quotas from when I just sign up. So I have to talk to their support, and to get ability to rent quickly big amount of resources. And could be like a bunch of details, like I'm gonna overpay for longer period than I actually used. And crypto network, like DePIN networks, are much more flexible. Like we currently, for example, charge per days, but we're gonna, switch to charging per hours, and then ideally per seconds. We want to charge per second because it's more convenient to everyone. Like it allows to utilize compute much more efficiently, and it's beneficial for everyone.
So really interesting question from Rosinate. I hope I said your name correctly there, but your question essentially comes down to something related to what you were just saying, which is affordability of DePIN for countries like India, where there's lots of customers, but they can't pay high fees because they can't afford it, basically. Like, let's talk a little bit about general affordability, at least of the use cases we're most familiar with. Compute, essentially access to compute. How does DePIN change that in terms of affordability and just global accessibility, you think?
Well, it's just simple economics. We bring more supply, and this way we make the compute cheaper, essentially. Like the more compute on the market, the cheaper it is. And DePIN projects allow, incentivize people to contribute compute, which means bigger overall compute capacity, which means lower price for everyone. Because essentially we saw how this happened recently in proof of work crypto mining, right? Essentially, it's a specific sort of use case where specific compute, all these ASICs and specific devices, but still the people essentially competing towards zero margin. Their costs of operating of these devices is equal to cost of electricity. And then they have some economics about which Bitcoins they sell most of it immediately to cover the expenses because they're quite high, but they also they keep some of Bitcoins to sell later when it goes up to sort of earn money. So with DePIN networks, it may be similar if it's really reaches the level of saturation when you really get a lot of compute connected and available all the time in the network, and then some of the providers would constantly be ready to lower the price and to compete by price with other providers to get more workload. Maybe some of these providers would get cheaper electricity. Maybe some of these providers would get better deals with data centers. Maybe some of them will be data centers, so their economics is better. So you're essentially pushing people by creating this big market and connecting supply and demand. You're pushing these participants to be as efficient as possible. So and I think it's very important in the context of growing AI and growing compute demand. And we see it right now, countries building data centers right around the world to onboard this need of compute capacity for AI tools. So that's why I think these DePIN compute networks are very important, because that's actually it makes the economics of compute much better.
All right, I'm going to give my own thoughts on this as well, which builds on what you're saying, and then I'm going to say our secret word. So listen carefully if you've been tuning in to listen to the secret word and earn some points on the Beamable Network leaderboard today. But there's some other ways to think about the way DePIN does things, which is we're taking compute and essentially creating a liquid asset class around it. So if compute truly becomes a liquid asset class, not unlike energy itself, then you create a lot more competition in the market, and that drives down the costs for a lot of the people who are customers of these kind of things. And what that also means is if you talk about a developing economy, for example, it allows them to access compute, which is powered by the cheapest energy availability out there, which also lowers the cost. Also, you do have the whole profit margin aspect of the siloed providers like an Amazon, for example, where there's just a lot of quarterly results. They got to keep posting up every quarter, and a lot of management layers and a lot of overhead to operate those businesses, which you've actually reduced out a lot of that in DePIN network, because it's really just direct operators joining the network. And typically within DePIN, the network taxes and things like that might, go back to a foundation to keep kind of managing and investing in R&D for the network is much less than like the profit extraction from a profit generating company. So that also contributes to it. I have seen some economics, by the way, where pretty frequently, like with access to compute, the bandwidth component can often be like 90% less. The compute itself is 50 to 70% less. You've probably seen similar numbers. I mean, relative to like cloud providers, so Azure and GCP and AWS and whatnot. So that ideally is opening up a lot more democratized access to these compute servers. But I loved the thing you commented about, like the similarity to proof of work mining operations, because also a lot of the Bitcoin mining operations or token mining operations, they're now getting into DePIN because it makes a lot of sense for them. They've really built their businesses around essentially what's energy arbitrage. So they get energy for one price, they do some computation using that energy to generate a token, and pretty much the MBAs that run these things are just running a spreadsheet every day. Like what's the mining that we should actually be doing today based on current energy cost for us versus the economic output. And for a lot of them, they will be getting into the DePIN business. So you can kind of think of DePIN as powered by energy and a little bit of equipment, but most of the cost, frankly, ends up being energy, because energy is the real cost of operating computers over the long term, not just the capital equipment up front. So it will continue to have this energy arbitrage where through the forces of competition, you converge on something that is really good for customers overall, because the profitability to operate them ends up being much lower than these big siloed providers where it costs billions. So I said I was going to give the secret word, so I'm going to give it out. The word, and we'll put it on the ticker below as well so that you can all see it. The word is infinite. INFINITE. Right? I think I just spelled it right.
I hope I spelled it right.
ITE. Yeah, you got it. Okay, so that's the word. Evgeny, we're kind of coming up towards the end of our hour, and I really want to thank you for participating in this. I think we were able to cover a lot of subject matter for people to learn about DePIN, as well as people who've been following DePIN probably get some additional ways to think about it. While we kind of wrap up in the last 2 or 3 minutes, any closing thought, any big picture ideas that you want to share back to the audience here?
Yeah, actually, my marketing team is asking me to also say a secret word.
Let's both get secret words, everybody. Go for it.
So our secret word is building the metaverse. So it's building the metaverse all together without spaces. Okay. And if you participate in our Pointless program, just enter this as a code and you're gonna get boost there.
There we go.
Oh yeah, it's written in
named after my channel. Well, hey, DePIN is probably going to be the thing that actually builds the metaverse here at a more fundamental low level. So I think DePIN is actually this is my closing thought that I'll share with everybody. So DePIN to me is the use case that allows blockchain to go from essentially being a set of financial products on chain, which has been great. Like it's been very transformative, but I think most sub-genres or sub-applications in blockchain today have been retargeting a very crypto native audience. And that's everything from DeFi, decentralized finance. And there was a much earlier point made about games. Like crypto actually is like, why don't we get great games on it? Well, for one thing, it takes a long time to make a good game, like 5+ years to make AAA games like the ones you mentioned. But yeah, like making it more of a financial transaction to get into these games and use your wallet to get in, with all these big mistakes that have been made in crypto gaming so far. That has just been more of a speed bump or an impediment to accessing it, and it's targeted largely at crypto native consumer. Now, a lot of games now realize that they have to target the general gaming market, not just create crypto games. So now the crypto piece is almost being buried in most Web3 games, and you discover it later. And I think some of those will expand out. But the reason I think DePIN is such a compelling category is that the ultimate customer of any of these services is not really a crypto native person in any way. If you need compute, if you need Wi-Fi, if you need, the weather, like, these are things that everybody needs. It is not a customer that has to care about blockchain or crypto. It just so happens that tokenizing the node operations, the network, all of those aspects we talked about earlier, is a great way to bootstrap and build these networks for the customer who is not crypto native. And this is pretty revolutionary within blockchain. It's a category that truly targets a customer who doesn't need to care about blockchain to benefit from it. And I think that's a pretty exciting change for the DePIN market. Evgeny, thank you so much for participating in the conversation today. This has been a lot of fun. We covered a lot of ground. And thanks to all of you who tuned in today. We've got over 600 people in the live audience learning about DePIN, I hope, for the first time. And go check out Fluence, learn all about what they're doing. Go check out Beamable Network. We're building a DePIN for game servers. And would love to see all of you again at all of these live streams. We cover this stuff: AI, Web3 gaming, general game development, decentralized tech. I do this 4 days a week, and we love it when all of you are here. And if you're watching it in replay, join us live sometimes. Thanks, Evgeny.
Thank you, John. It's been a wonderful discussion.
All right, until next time.